Hello, welcome to the Marriage Underdogs Radio Show podcast. I'm your host, Chris A. Matthews, and once again, I have a phenomenal guest. I would like to introduce you to Psiyina Davis, who's a licensed marriage and family therapist out of Durham, North Carolina. Hello, Psiyina.
Hello, good morning.
Oh man, so glad that you took time out of your schedule to be on the show. And I love to open up with every guest, especially my licensed marriage and family therapist, which you are, to share a little bit about what led you down the LMFT track, because as African Americans, we tend to not see a lot of us in mental health that who've pursued the LMFT track. So what was it about LMFT that caught your attention?
So initially, I wasn't in this track. I did get into mental health to help couples. And then I also wanted to help others as well, because divorce is high in my family. And I thought, let me be a part of the solution and break that cycle. But a very prominent late LMFT, Dr. Hattie Daniel Rush, an LMFT out of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, was like, you need to be an LMFT because we have the way. And she just really helped me to think a little bit differently about LMFT as a license and an approach to therapy overall. And I kind of just did my research and was like, you know what, I think I need to switch my track and go LMFT route. And so that's how I got into it, more specifically, even though originally I wanted to get with couples, and I'm not sure why I was looking that I didn't go that way originally. The licensed LPC initially was where I started, but I made the switch
Not really,
very early on,
not really
very early
offered
on.
that lot a lot too, right? Like in our state of North Carolina, outside of online programs, currently I believe there are only really two institutions that offer a co-AMTHY, which is the accreditation body program. That's East Carolina and Appalachian State, if I'm not mistaken. Pfeiffer University, they lost their accreditation and they
Right.
actually ceased the program. So there are not a lot of options in our state for LMFT and really nationwide. So it's not as prevalent as your social worker or your clinical mental health counselor. And I'm so glad that you said Dr. Hattie David Rush.
Hattie Daniels Rush,
Hattie Daniels
doctor.
Rush. I'm so
Yes.
glad that they were the one that pulled you into the field. When you
Yeah.
think about like working with couples, when surveyed by most clinicians, they tend to not want to do couples work. It's deemed one of the hardest type of therapies to provide. However, it's the most marketed and lucrative when it comes to therapists seeking to gain clientele. Can you talk about where your authentic passion came from? You mentioned a little bit about coming from a family of divorcees. So give us some more insight on your why when it comes to working and helping couples.
Yeah. So prior to becoming licensed, I started having people outside of our church seek me out for counseling.
Mhm.
And I started to feel really inadequate. And I was like, oh, I need to get some training here, to be more effective. And also I when I say just, and I would have to go outside of my branch of our family for couples who are still with their original spouse.
Hmm.
On my mother's side and my father's side, I would have to go into my great uncle's branch, or great aunt's branch for couples that married till death to us part. So
Now, was it
um,
marriages that ended in divorce, or was it just never marrying at all, or a little bit of both?
divorce, no,
Okay.
divorce, no, there was a lot of marriages, but it was quite a few divorces in there, and so a lot of second, third, fourth marriages type things. So and so I wanted to be equipped to do that. And then I wanted a lens that incorporated my faith as well.
Hmm.
Um, Another motivation was breaking the stigma that we didn't need help, that
Hmm.
couples didn't need help. I remember distinctly when my parents were separated. And I remember asking my dad, hey, why don't you all go get couples counseling? Here I am not knowing anything about counseling, but I remember asking that question. And the answer was, I don't want people in my business. And I thought, well, how dumb is that?
Right.
Because we go to our doctor, they're in our business.
They
We
all
go to
up in our
the
business.
listen, my optometrist is all up in my business, okay? We go to these other professionals, our dentists and different things for our physical health. Why not go to someone to help you to navigate the challenges within your relationship? And so
Absolutely.
that has really been something that has been just different pillars have been motivating factors for why I really wanted to be a help to couples. I'm even in my doctoral work right now in for marriage and family therapy, and my project is going to be on couples
Hmm.
and helping couples. So
And I
at
want to go back to something you shared, because those who are listening, and I try to be mindful, because in this day and age where you have your TikTok and your Instagram superstars who are giving what may be valuable advice, it's not clinically sound, or it could just work for them. It doesn't mean it's going to work for everybody. And you talked about how people sought you out because they acknowledged that you may have had a gift or a calling, but you personally were responsible enough to say, hey, I'm going to grow this gift. I'm going to nourish this gift. I'm going to pour into this gift. So what prevented you from just saying, I'm just going to be a coach and use my experience and read a couple books? Because there are a lot of coaches that have a gift of gab, and they might have had a really tough marriage that they turned around. Why not just be a coach that's on Instagram and hosting events, but never when he got fully trained? Like, what's the difference?
So I think at the time that I was contemplating this, coaching was not a big thing
Gotcha.
yet. Um, and even if it was, for me, getting the credential was essential because I wanted to be a credible voice in my community. And not that coaching is not credible, but I wanted the professional license um, to back up my work, to back up my training, and to really fuel me and arm me with tools to help people. Plus, I like learning and growing. And so I knew that getting this master's was going to stretch me and grow me in a way that I had not been just yet. And so I went to Liberty. They are COAMT accredited, and I knew I could get the dual um, training. Um, now that I'm in my new program at National University, formerly North Central,
They're also
um,
as well. Yeah.
yeah, they have definitely been one of our sponsors of our national conference, and so that's how I learned about them some years back. Um, but I wanted to sharpen this lens, this systemic lens, a whole lot more than it was. So Liberty gave me definitely a good foundation in sort of integration, but the training I'm getting now is sharpening this systemic lens.
And I want to talk about that sharpening piece for a second, because I was listening to an audiobook. Well, I'm currently listening to an audiobook. It's called The Speed of Trust. And it's by the son of Stephen Covey, who wrote 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And one of the things he talks about with trust, he says that to be capable or have a high capacity to deliver on a skill set, it's not like the olden days where you go get a 4-year degree and that was over. He said you have to go get a 40-year degree, meaning you have to be a lifelong learner. And what a
Absolutely.
license represents is lifelong learning, because you have to obtain 20 hours of continued education credit every year to
Yes.
sustain the licensed marriage and family therapy credential. I want the public to hear that, because you may work with a coach who read a couple books, but no one's managing and regulating. And my pastor, he always talks about, you don't go on what someone tells you, you go on what you can inspect. So that license allows you to inspect the person's quality. And when you look at a marriage or a relationship, this isn't something to play with. A lot of times when a person has a failed attempt at therapy, meaning they go to a counselor or a professional that doesn't do a good job, they're less likely to find a second one. So can you talk about your approach to creating a safe environment and how your training has helped you get it right the first time when a couple attempts to seek your services?
So here's the interesting part about who's seeking the services. So I have an approach that I'll come back to that. That I try to come with a we dynamic, that I'm on the side of the marriage. And so I'm here to help you to achieve the goals that you say you want to accomplish. And I'll introduce different techniques, different interventions. But you got to practice. I emphasize homework, because, whether it's a couple or individual or a family, if you aren't practicing interrupting some of these habits and patterns, um, our work will be futile, because I'm
Absolutely.
only a small microcosm of time in your life. And so, it took you 20 years to get this habit.
Right, right.
It took you, all these years to develop these patterns and rhythms. And so, um, even as a couple, if you're trying to interrupt this yelling
Yeah. To alter the
pattern,
homeostasis, right?
yes,
Mhm.
yes, now I'm trying to help you to practice some emotional regulation. And you're like, what do you mean I got to regulate myself? I don't understand what you're telling me. So I think that I try to instill that kind of environment. I try to make sure both voices are valued in the session.
It sounds
Um,
like you're treating the relationship as the client, not two individual people. The system is the client. And it makes me think about, from the faith-based line of work, usually at the end of a service, a pastor will do an altar call. And they will request that if the persons who are not saved choose to accept Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior, right? And you're
mhm.
now entering the kingdom. Well, when you get into the kingdom, you are an infant. You're being fed milk. You're not able to eat solid food yet. And then we had on the show a couple weeks back, Bishop Derek Price out of Bethel Community Christian Center out of Long Island, New York. And what Bishop Price said, he said how you have to be marinated. And you think about the homework that you prescribe or the between session work, you're helping that couple marinate themselves in new patterns, behaviors, rituals, and routines. And I want you to speak on the training, because you mentioned models and techniques and theories. So talk about how maybe a coach might provide someone something they saw on YouTube versus you as a clinician giving more of a scientific based approach. So give us a little bit more insight on the fullness or the richness that you're able to deliver by way of your credentialing.
Yeah, so definitely try to research the techniques and use the training that I've had and ongoing training, um, to help me to see what's happening. So, for example, one of my I noticed something about a client many years ago who, I gotta be right. And would come to the every session like, I gotta be right. And I was like, wow, my training helped me to kind of see that, that these couples were just battling about who's right and and you're wrong, and really emphasizing going hard on the wrongness. But my training helped me to get them to cleanse their lens a little bit differently, so that it wasn't so much on who's wrong or right. It's okay, it's probably a both and in this situation. And that you got to learn to kind of cleanse your lens, to go on their side, to go, oh, okay, no wonder you're saying this, no wonder you're feeling and thinking this way. And I got to go on your side and go, oh, okay, no wonder you're thinking and feeling this way. And then the trick is to not go back on the side. See, I was right all along. I knew he was wrong. I knew she was right. And to help them to kind of slow down all that reactivity. And I think that my training helps me to be able to see that and to kind of discern what's happening in the room, and to kind of help them, you know, question them, to help them to say, oh, wait a minute, I need to rethink how I'm responding to her, or I need to rethink how I'm approaching this with him.
You make a valid point I want to highlight, because what I heard you just say was your training allows you to keep the non-biased approach to continue to treat the system and the couple and not one other partner. Those that aren't trained get pulled into the relationship and they become a
The
side
triangle.
right.
Yep.
They get
Yep.
sucked in where you now have the coach that's not trained trying to educate the female partner on why the husband's right, or vice versa. You're trying to educate the husband on why the wife's right. But I'm hearing you say when you're properly trained, you enable the system to auto-correct itself where you're still able to take and maintain that aerial viewpoint, and you're not
Absolutely.
pulled in and just giving your own personal experience. Talk about how, as a counselor who has training, you're not relying on personal disclosure. Although it might be
Oh,
something you use every now and again, but it's not your number one go-to, which I find
mhm.
most coaches tend to just lean on.
Oh, absolutely. I don't lean on that at all. And I lean heavily on my training. And I even had someone try to pull me in to dog out a colleague because, you know, that therapeutic alliance is important. And so everybody's not a good fit for everyone. And so I had to, you know, educate them and say, hey, you know, everyone, you know, just kind of like how you had to pick your church or you had to pick your, you know, your doctor, you had to get the right fit that was for you. And it's okay that, you know, because I'm not for everybody.
Right, right.
And so I think my training helped me to sort of navigate that and help them to see, listen, we're working on helping you get this thing on the track that you're wanting it to be. And my journey is my journey.
Right.
This is your journey. Even when I had someone try to pull that in, and I was like, well, no, this is your session is about you.
So you're avoiding the enmeshment that comes usually when you don't have training. And I'll find that there'll be this approach that coaches might take to, I call it the getting the reaction approach, right? Where they
Mm,
will start off with their story and the story might create a connection. But when you get deep into the wilderness, when you get into the thick of it, and that couple is now reliant on you giving them fish versus having the skills to create a place to find their own fish, the detriment comes when the coach is no longer available. The detriment comes
yeah.
at that point, you just taught someone how to be relying on you versus them being reliant on each other. Can you share
Yeah.
how, as a systemic based clinician, you're pulling in multiple factors and you're creating what I like to call or believe we tend to want to do second order change. I'm not saying we don't do first order as well, but can you talk about the first order versus second order and how we tend to lean more, if possible, on that second order than that first
Yeah,
order?
we want to help them to develop the tools and skills to help them see what changes need to be made, what adjustments, and kind of take ownership of self,
Right.
if you
A
will.
process, not
And
just content.
yes, yes. And I think that by um, helping them to see their own story, which is why I start with genograms with my
Absolutely.
couples. And I've been fascinated over the years how that opens up their mind to themselves and their own development and their own things that they've picked from their family of origin, and how that's influenced how they're showing up today.
Absolutely.
Um, and it's helped them to kind of go, all right, hold on, you know, my mama did this, but I want to treat my spouse differently. or,
Yeah.
I saw how she did this, or how my father did this, or the absence thereof.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and how now I got to develop how I want to treat. And so I try to help them to see that one, change is possible. Two, it's up to them to decide what that change is going to be.
Now
And
let's pause for a second because that part was big. You said it's up to them to decide what that change is going to be. It's not
absolutely,
you as the practitioner telling them what the change should be. I just
no,
want
not at
to
all.
that was important.
Yeah, because I'm not living their life.
Mm.
They're living their life. And so the decisions that they make, I feel emphasize even with couples autonomy, authority, and agency, and helping them to see that, okay, what you're wanting is possible. And I may give some feedback on, hey, have you thought about, have you considered? Well, let's see what happens when this happens, because it may work, it may not, but
It's a scientific approach.
let's go for it. Yeah, let's
Yeah.
see what it's going to do for you. Um, and it helps them to kind of realize not only is change possible, but I'm in charge of this, and we're working together. I often drive that with my couples, that it's okay to help each other to change. Like, you don't have to have this hands-off approach that, it's only you. And I use the analogy of spilling milk, that just because it was my elbow that spilt it doesn't mean you can't help me with the cleanup,
Oh
and
wow.
doesn't mean that, I spilt it because I turned to look at you to fuss. Well, okay. Maybe we can, change how we're responding when we feel that fire rising up on the inside of each other, and recognize,
I got to pause because I got to go back to the
okay,
bar. That was a bar you just dropped right there. Just because it was my elbow that knocked it over, it doesn't mean that you can't help me clean it up.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
that was great. That was
Because
good.
it's that we-ness that I try to infuse along the way, that we got us here,
Mhm.
we can help us move from here.
Now
And
let's talk about that for a second because infidelity is a large area of
mhm,
treatment that I focus on, especially with couples. When a partner comes in and they go, "No, you cheated. You had sex with someone else. You answered the Facebook message. You reached out. You did not enforce appropriate boundaries. So you got us here, not we." How do you still approach that systemically and help that couple heal collectively?
so part of the healing is listening to the impact, and being, and kind of getting shame and guilt out of the way. Not out of the way, but not letting that lead how you're responding and reacting, because shame and guilt will have you not wanting to listen.
Mhm.
Shame and guilt will have you not wanting to take ownership. And so,
We're just trying to avoid the pain.
because I hurt you.
Mhm.
Also, revenge, unforgiveness will help me want to hold this over you because you hurt me. And so I try to get them to slow down for a moment, and let's acknowledge where each other is, and take ownership of self, each other's choices and decision, and sort of accept what happened back there.
Hmm.
Very
Acceptance
honestly,
doesn't mean that you have to like it. Acceptance doesn't mean you have to continue to tolerate it, but acceptance means that you have to acknowledge that it happened.
I need to acknowledge that I did this. I need to acknowledge that that hurt me.
Hmm.
Okay, both are valid. Both need to be understood, and then sort of that dialectical. We can accept what was and change,
Mhm.
and decide that we still want to be together and we want to go forward. And so now I kind of draw from Gottman a little bit. So we're building marriage 2.0 here. So
Right.
we got to lay some new bricks. We
Right.
can't.
We have to grieve and then rebuild. We have to grieve.
Yep.
And, then,
Grieve, rebuild. We got to decide, how we
and
want
I
to
noticed
approach
in
things
your
going
statement
forward.
in your statement earlier, you said that. And then you talked about we. And I was listening very intently because when you said that, you did such a beautiful job of extracting the problem from the person. That
Absolutely.
hurt me. So the action is what we're looking at that hurt. Now,
Yes.
you might have conducted the action, but
Hmm.
I have to remind myself you still love me. You still want to be with me, but what you did hurt me.
Yes.
And at that point, that can alleviate or reduce the shame and guilt that comes by way of being that blockage that prevents couples from moving on, right? And also like the way you said through, we sometimes want to avoid or go around or over, but we have to go through the problem. And when you go through something, it gets on you.
Absolutely. And then forgiveness is part of this process. Not only forgiveness of my spouse, but forgiveness of self.
Mm-hmm. And that's what makes it collective, right? Because the spouse is forgiving you, but you have to forgive you too.
Absolutely.
Yeah. There was actually
Absolutely.
Dr. Bryant. He's a pastor, very popular pastor. I forgot his first, Jamal Bryant.
Jamal. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and he just had a clip on Instagram, and he talked about how he said he said him and his wife, he said, no, I didn't get divorced because of irreconcilable differences. I got divorced because I cheated. I broke the covenant. And then he talked about how in this interview, he had to forgive himself and figure out what was wrong in him that led to breaking that covenant of monogamy. And that was a journey. That was a process. He said it was a self-healing process. So I like the fact that you're talking about the perspective from both parts. Yes, your partner may have to forgive you, but you have to forgive you too. And forgiveness is a journey. It's a process. It's not just, I'm sorry.
Absolutely. No, it's not just, I'm sorry. And it takes two people who are wanting to go through that process, because even part of the spouse who was cheated on has to go through their healing and realize, okay, this was not about me. This was, I'm whole. I'm
good
enough.
enough. Yeah.
I am enough. And that we do need to change how we're doing some things, because we want to have an open and honest relationship. So that way, whatever needs we have, we go to each other, not outside of the covenant to meet those needs. And so it's a process in terms of getting helping one heal and helping one heal.
Absolutely.
Two different healing journeys at the same time, right?
Yeah. Now, sigh-YE-nuh, you put on just such a masterclass when it comes to breaking down how counselors who are trained provide value in comparison to maybe a coach that's just going on their own thoughts or beliefs. You've also talked about the value of doing systemic work to help bridge and mend families who may be suffering from transgressions, whether it be infidelity. You've also talked about how it's important for people to approach counseling and finding a therapist the same way they do a doctor. It might be trial and error. It may take time, and every counselor is not the right fit for every client. And as we come to a close, I just want to make sure that I give you an opportunity to share with the listeners how they can get in contact with you. And I just want to put it out there in the atmosphere. We got to do a part two. I'd love to have your husband, Dr. Bishop Herbert, come on, who's also the pastor of Nehemiah Church.
Yes.
Right? So let's go ahead and put this in the atmosphere to do a part two. But before we jump, I just want to give you an opportunity to share with the listeners how they can get in contact with you, any projects you're working on. I know your PhD. We want to keep you in thoughts and prayers for that as well.
Yes, because I'm just starting my journey.
But just want to give you, closing words as well on what projects you're doing, how people can get in contact with you, and just any other nugget you would like to drop before we end today.
So you can follow me on Instagram at PL Davis LMFT. Also on Facebook, PL Davis LMFT. My website is www.sigh-YE-nuh.com. And as far as things I'm working on, I'm in school. Keep me in prayer. I'm just starting my PhD journey, and I'm so excited about it. It's just been stretching me and growing me in ways that I couldn't even have fathomed, and needed this stretching, actually. So as far as projects, I'm available for workshops I do quite a few workshops in the church and public sector. So feel free to reach out to me for mental health workshops.
Awesome. This has been a pleasure to have you on. You dropped so many nuggets and dimes. I'll just there are a lot of quotable moments from this episode. So as you review it back, please, I want to see these quotes on your Instagram because you really dropped some nuggets. For those that have been listening, I'm your host, Chris A. Matthews. You've tuned into the Marriage Underdog Radio Show. You can find our episodes on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. We drop a new episode every week. Thank you for listening, and we look forward to continuing to provide valuable content.
Thank you for having me on.
Yes, thank you for being here.